What's up, everyone? I'm going to do a presentation on this recent essay I wrote called On Melisma, and it's on the vocal technique called melisma, compositional technique for text setting, which maybe you know what that is, maybe not. It's rife throughout my catalog, and basically we're going to talk about how I use this technique, what it means in my work aesthetically, and then also philosophically, intellectually, what I'm thinking about with it, emotional connections in a personal way. And I'm excited about the piece. It got published in the most recent edition of Arcana. Get that so you don't see the glare. Arcana is this volume of essays by musicians about music, which John Zorn publishes roughly every year. This is the 10th installment of it. And there's a bunch of great essays in this one. There's Stephen O'Malley has one, Dave Lombardo, Ty Braxton, Oren Ambarchi. The book is pretty widely available. You can order it directly from Zorn or from Amazon. We'll have links in the comments to show you where to get that if you want to pick it up. If any of this stuff seems like a stretch or it's overly abstract or it's forced, it's not. It all totally makes sense. I'm totally normal. What is melisma? The definition is several notes sung to one syllable of text. So if you're setting text to music, you would, come up on a melisma and then you would stretch it out, right? Like that. And you find it in tons of musics from across world cultures and history. I mean, mostly it's associated with contemporary R&B, gospel music. I got it more from medieval music and early music, Renaissance music, and of course from Morrissey. Morrissey and me are kind of the only examples I can really think of with like really melismatic singing in a sort of post-punk kind of context. If anyone can think of any other ones, please write it in the comments. So basically, there's no one system of how I use melisma in all my pieces. It's not like some really unified concept, but it's sort of different in each case, and we'll talk about different cases and the sort of specific ways I'm using melisma in different pieces. But an overarching issue tends to be the dialectic between pure sound and words, right? Singing a word versus singing pure sound. The sort of going in and out of the two is used poetically in different ways in different pieces. Once we really start zigzagging around to like actual philosophers, it'll be George Bataille and Julia Kristeva are going to be my two touchstones here. They're like my touchstones for so much different stuff. The first section in the essay is called Text Setting, Abstraction, and Materiality. So we're going to be talking about the difference between the abstract and the material. I start out by outlining 4 different methods of setting text, and I lay them out in sequence of increasing complexity. All right. So first you've got recitative, also known as psalm note singing. That's when you're chanting on one syllable and then maybe you go up for a second, but basically you're on one note and then maybe you go down. That's, you recognize that from like ancient Christian liturgy, in that world, it's called psalm note singing. In opera, it's called recitative. In R&B, I think you'd call that like rap singing. That was like a big thing in the 2000s. Nelly and R. Kelly were doing that stuff. So that's the simplest. The next one is syllabic text setting. That's like the most normal. One note per syllable, just moving around like a normal song, right? Then the next thing you've got pneumatic setting. People don't really say pneumatic. It's not really that different, but like in medieval music and that ancient stuff, this is where you'd call it pneumatic, where you have a small number of notes for one syllable. So you're singing normally, just a little bit, a few extra notes in there, right? And then the fourth level is melisma, where you're actually stretching out a syllable from many, many, many notes. And I was reading this guy, Anthony Heilbutt, wrote this article about melisma and pop music, and he was saying how a singer will worry a word to the point of abstraction. And the main point that I'm making in this section is that use of the word abstraction, I've heard that a lot before. People and they've said that about my music, my singing style. They've been like, oh, it gets so abstract, very abstract. And Main point I try to make here is that the way people use the word abstract with music and with melisma in particular, it's actually the opposite of what I think it should be. Because to me, melisma is less abstract than singing words. If you look up the word abstract, Merriam-Webster dictionary, it says expressing a quality apart from an object. Okay, so something, you've got an object, and then if that object expresses a quality that's separate from it, that's abstraction. When you talk about like abstract art, basically it doesn't represent anything other than itself. It's not representational, it's just materials, right? Just paint on a canvas. So to me, actually, representational art, when you use paint to refer to represent like a house or something, that's actually what's abstract. That's representational art is abstract. So-called abstract art is less abstract because it's not, the paint is not referring to something apart from itself. The power of the work is imminent to the physical materials of the paint and stuff. In the case of vocal music, pure sound is the medium's material instead of paint. So in this case, words are what is abstract in that they use sound symbolically to signify things apart from the sound's own objective materiality. Okay, so when a singer uses melisma to open up a word, allowing the eruption of non-signifying sound, the music has become less abstract, more material. When you're singing a word and then melisma opens it up, you're letting non-signifying pure sound sort of enter into this signification process of a word, and it sort of disrupts the signifying. You know, it disrupts the articulation of a word. It's like a portal. I think of it as a portal opening up in the word. That vowel is like a aperture, you know, in the integrity of the word that you're singing and the text. All right, so that thing of melisma being less abstract and words being more abstract, that's used differently in my different pieces. Okay, so one way that melisma is employed in the Middle Ages that's like really famous is for this, it's used in the Alleluia of the Christian Mass, and that Alleluia, when you stretch out the ah, is like a moment of heightened religious ecstasy. You know, same thing in gospel music, like when God's glory, just you're like so just seized by the Spirit, it's beyond expression. You can't express it in words, so you have to just go into pure sound because God is beyond signification, beyond naming. And I use melisma in my own stuff sometimes in that way. Like in the example I use in the essay is the 2012 Extra Life piece, 10-Year Teardrop. At the end on the word God, I stretch out the word God for like 3 minutes of just straight up melisma. So that's like the religious ecstasy kind of way of using it. Now, one of the points that I make as far as the way I think of this stuff is that to use pure sound, pure non-abstract, objective, melismatic sound to express the sacred or God or the divine, the way I conceive it is a little bit counterintuitive to normal ideas of transcendence, because normally when you think of transcendence, right, or like this, the God's glory or something, you think of there's like the material world of like objects and stuff and sound and mud and flesh, and then this divine thing, like power comes down, this light or breath or something that sort of redeems it from above. But see, for me, having the sacred expressed by pure sound is kind of the opposite. In my conception, it is not that God's glory is above the grasp of words, but is in fact below it. The sacred does not lie in a rarefied higher plane, more abstract than language. Rather, it lies immanent to the lowly, less abstract domain of the material, the purely sonic. I think of the sacredness as being the totally unredeemed baseness of pure sound. What's sacred about it is just this crude, unredeemed thing that doesn't refer to anything else other than itself. It's just immanent. The power is just immanent in the sound itself. So for me, this kind of like gets into what Bataille talks about when he talks about base materialism and Gnosticism. He talks about the sacred as coming from below or from within things, within the objective, not from above. We're not really talking about God. We're talking more about the sacred. You know what I mean? Which for me, it's sort of a different thing. I think for Bataille and for that Gnostic point of view, that thing where you're looking at base materialism as being the sacred, the baseness of pure sound, of the pure vowel, that's what's sort of different than God, where you're referring up to a higher referent. You're referring to nothing, right? The sacredness is in the utterly unsacred material baseness of just sound. Okay, so in 10-Year Teardrop, you've got religious ecstasy expressed through base materialism of pure objective sound. Then I talk about another example of this use of materialism, which is in the song Black Sun. So Black Sun is from Simple Answers.
Thing I've always known, turning my mind to stone.
This is like a way darker kind of a thing, because the song is really about suicidal depression or just the urge toward death, this sort of like the Freudian death drive, basically. And the way melisma gets used there is basically like the death drive here in Black Sun is about being turned to stone, the suicidal urge to return to an inanimate state. This is something super deep that I get from Mark Fisher and I guess, no, from Freud, actually, just himself with the death drive. He talks about how because organic life is descended from inorganic life, there is this primal nostalgia for being inorganic matter where part of the death drive is that you want on some level to be returned to stone or just opened up into base matter. In this song, Black Sun, the unraveling of words into pure sound, the pure materiality of melisma, is kind of like this parallel of the speaker in the song, his desire to be returned to the material state of pure matter. In the beginning, he's singing in this way that like it's dark, but he's still singing words.
Black Sun.
But then by the end of the song, it sort of overflows into send me a melody. And at that point, you've got all this, like, the word melody, it gets stretched into all these melismas.
My melody.
He sort of starts to unravel, and his speech unravels, his singing speech unravels into the pure materiality of melisma, and it's sort of like a dissolving of the persons. Kristeva, who I have read a bunch, she talks about how speaking is such a huge part of constituting oneself as a human subject, as a person, like having an integrated sense of self is constituted through speaking. I'm pretty sure she gets that from Lacan. I admittedly have not read Lacan, and I only really know his ideas through Kristeva's sort of filter. But I know that the idea of speaking as constitutive of human subjectivity is a thing. In my lyrics, this is the thing. It's like when you're singing words, you're very much like there. There's a person singing. They're like, I am a person because I'm singing words. Hi. But then when things dissolve into melisma, it's kind of like the speaker's in a sense dying because the speech is unraveling, and that act of speaking sort of dissolves and becomes this less abstract thing. It's like dark in that there's this suicidal thing in the lyrics, but then once you get there and the words die, the singing dies by dissolving into the pure sound of melisma, it's actually this beautiful deliverance of like melody.
Play out the language of the day.
So now these ideas of melisma as pure materiality and words as abstractions. It goes deeper in the next chapter, which is it's a short chapter called The Continuity of Existence. And with this, this goes deeper into some of Bataille's. This is straight up Bataille from the book Erotism. Check it out. He says, "We are discontinuous beings, but we yearn for our lost continuity. The quest for continuity of existence signifies an essentially religious intention." Okay? Religion comes from religare in Latin, means to bind together. That fits in with this thing about materiality, because like I said, the human being dying and being returned to pure physical inorganic matter, that's being opened up into the continuity of existence. Organic life in a physical sense and just the self in a psychological, philosophical sense is based on discontinuity. It's sealed, right? The self is sealed off from everything else. And so for him, what the religious impulse is kind of like a death drive in the sense that it's ego death, or the death of the subject, death insofar as you're no longer discontinuous and you are bound together, fused together with the outside, which is just the continuum of undifferentiated matter. When melisma interrupts the singing of words, that's kind of like you're taking the word, which was a discontinuous thing, right? It's discontinuous in that it describes a thing, it names a thing. Speech constitutes the subject as a discontinuous thing, separate from the world, separate from everything else, and speech and language define ideas and naming things so therefore making them discrete from other things, making them discontinuous. So when you have melisma come and interrupt that signification, you're having that word that you were singing sort of disappear and fuse back into the continuity of existence, the continuity of matter, matter being pure sound. And just even on a physical level, a sort of less philosophical level, when you sing melismatically, it's got to be a vowel, right? It's not just that it's pure sound interrupting the singing of a word. It's that it's a vowel sound. So it's kind of like you're opening up your body. You're breaking the seal. I mean, I guess all singing is kind of opening up your body to the outside. But when you start to just do pure vowel sounds, you're interrupting the sound less. So it's like this continuous, this continuity of flow of breath where you are more fused with the outside. The next chapter is called Excess, and it's another short one. It keeps going with Bataille, but excess is a big part of Bataille's thinking, and it talks more about this idea of melisma as pure materiality. And what Bataille says about excess, he says, "There is in nature a movement which always exceeds the bounds. Indeed, it is by definition that which can never be grasped. But through the excess in him, that God who we would like to shape into an intelligible concept never ceases exceeding this concept, to exceed the limits of reason." There's this image of too much, that melisma is like it breaks with reason and it breaks with intelligibility, language. It breaks with language not just by departing from language by going into pure sound, pure vowel sound, but that pure vowel sound is like an excess. It's a sense of spilling over. The example I use is another old Extra Life example, which was from the song Voluptuous Life.
Everything must go, everything must flow, whoa, 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 whoa.
I was very consciously, when I say everything must go, everything must flow, I'm using melisma there. It's, pretty programmatic, like one-to-one, obvious sort of thing. That song is just all about Bataillean excess, hedonism, Dionysian just spilling, unleashing flows, just the flow of sperm money, vomit, blood, tears, this sense of excess for Bataille. And for me, it's not just about the religious or the sacred, it's also about the erotic. Black Sun depicted the depressive's lugubrious slouching toward this fusion with the outside, death. Voluptuous Life is its manic, excessive counterpart. Hedonism's excess vitalism pushes the subject toward the continuity of death, whether as the little death of the orgasm, heart attack, or financial ruin. And at the same time, melisma's sonic excess bursts apart the word, flowing back into the continuum of sound, right? So it's sort of like the excessive vital bursting of the word. Pure sound bursting outside the word is sort of the death drive of the word through sound.
Am I right? Am I right?
So if we're talking about the speaker of this song yearning to be returned to stone, to die and become material again, and then we're talking about his singing turning into melisma at the end with the melody, I'm putting it this way. This dissolution, or at least disruption, of verbal signification by melisma brings the death of speech into speaking. If mastery of the symbolic is how the speaking subject demarcates and maintains his identity, then melisma's flirtation with the death of the symbolic, the eruption of non-symbolic melodic materiality, that gives our depressed speaker a taste of what he wants, a taste of death. And so that's what's sort of redemptive, is like flirting with the death of speech, flirting with the death of your own death. Okay, so the next chapter is on power. And here's where I start to this goes even further into what you wouldn't necessarily expect. It's not obvious. Very personal, kind of idiosyncratic way that I use melisma to poetically render stuff in my lyrics, okay? Power and just power dynamics, questions about it, feelings about it, that's been a thread through my songwriting, lyric writing since the beginning, basically. And I've said this before. This is not activism, man. But power always is political to an extent. But this is usually questions, riffs, ambiguities, not agendas or ideologies. On this topic, I refer to this piece called The Next Stab. This was written for a very short-lived project of mine from 2004 called Seductive Sprigs. It was a duo of me and Matt Huff, the other guitar player from Z's, the other founding guitar player. What the piece does, it uses melisma in a very programmatic, deliberate way.
You don't wanna believe that your friend would look you in the face and tell you for no reason to submit completely to him.
It's a autobiographical story. It's told in the second person, like you're doing this happens to you, but it's me. But we'll say you for this. Your friend forces you to get into this cardboard box. This is when you're a child. Duct tapes it shut and starts stabbing it with scissors to torment you. All right. Kids are dark, whatever, all part of growing up. When I tell this story, I oscillate between melismatic singing and recitative singing, psalm note singing, right? That da 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 chanting on one note. Those are kind of the two extremes of text setting. Melisma is the most flowing, free one, and that psalm note recitative one note singing, that's the most confined.
But once you crawl in, he closes the flaps, all goes black, and lo and behold, he wraps the box in duct tape so you can get out, you can't move at all, and he can't move anywhere he wants to.
When I'm talking about being confined, trapped in this cardboard box and duct taped in there, sort of imprisoned, I'm rapid fire singing about that with psalm note singing. I go between that and describing him, the aggressor, bully guy, roaming freely outside of the box where I'm imprisoned, and I talk about him, and it's these long flowing melismas. melisma kind of represents power and strength, whereas recitative represents kind of weakness or being, dominated, imprisoned, confined. Speaking, which is abstraction, as I've defined it, using language and using sound in an abstract way to represent ideas, that is a weak position, and that the dominant, violent aggressor's position is the pure materiality of sound, melisma. I put it this way: language, notoriously unable to represent reality as it truly is a kind of prison. Whether we are attempting to name the power of God in his unrepresentable highness, or to describe Bataille's continuity of being in its sacred material baseness, language spells impotence either way. Language is the abstract, the intellectual, unable to touch the terrible power of existence's totality. Outside of the box, the tyrant roams. Outside of the verbal and melodic confines of recitative's verbal signifying, melisma flows. In this case, melisma as an unraveling of the human. It's not this religious, ecstatic, beautiful redemption thing, and it's not this taste of death that maybe you want in a sort of suicidal, dark religious way like in Black Sun. In this case, it's actually threatening. The recitative is a desperate, vain scrambling to signify, in the face of what always trumps words, thoughts, and abstraction, the power of pure action. Melisma not only represents pure materiality, and that's sort of the terrible power of that, it also represents the power of pure action. A lot of this for me comes from Umberto Eco's famous essay, Ur-Fascism, pretty famous essay on fascism, where he's talking about not the movement of actual like Italian and German fascism, but he's talking about the sort of psychological currents and cultural attitudes that sort of accompany that. And he talks about the cult of action for action's sake, and this idea, this sort of anti-intellectual, anti-reflecting, anti-contemplative, anti-abstract view of what the Übermensch is, or what the superior man is really all about. And this issue of pure action versus abstraction in speech is very relevant to the next chapter. Okay, so the next chapter is the Jew. So now we're getting into just my personal obsessions here. I mean, this is, there's nothing about melisma that inherently relates to this at all. Totally personal stuff, but it's very, like, it really does mean something to me. I'm using as a example here the song Ritual Fire from the Simple Answers record. This song is about a whole bunch of different things. You can check it out in the Behind the Music Simple Answers video. I talk like more in depth. But one of the things that it's about is anti-Semitism, self-directed Jewish anti-Semitism, and just concepts of what Jewishness means, okay? In this thing, I take where in the next stab, the Seductive Sprigs piece, I've got a thing where speaking, the abstract is weakness, pure power, pure sound, pure melisma is strength, pure action. The place in this piece where I decided to really deliberately go off on melismatic excursions is in this part.
A real man, no words, a whole man, no thoughts, a hard man can crush the Jew inside and live alone on danger and play. Nothing more than power play.
Danger and Play is a reference to Nietzsche. It's also a reference to the blog of Mike Chernovich, famed men's rights activist from the past decade. So you see, the huge melisma here is on play. And so I'm saying that the Jew inside is that verbal, abstract, intellectualizing, naming, speaking guy. The real, like, the true man, or the Übermensch, the, beyond man, is a figure of pure action. I mean, this is Nietzsche's thing. When I go to play, play gets stretched out. Melisma is playful. Words, singing words, abstraction, is rigorous, dry, and not playful. Play and the sort of pure materiality and pure action of melisma represents a kind of playfulness that the Jew is kind of incapable of, and therefore is weak. The Jew inside all of us, with his weak and weakening words and ideas, must be destroyed, just as words themselves face their final dissolution in the non-abstract material power of melisma's playful movement. Language is mocked as weakness from the point of view of a superior, supralinguistic man who wields the unnameable power of the continuity of existence. Now, some of this stuff I get from Julia Kristeva. It's sort of like intuitions that I had about language, Jewishness, song. Some of these things were really corroborated when I read Julia Kristeva's book, Powers of Horror. That's classic, man. Weird theory-wise, 20th century, absolute must. I've been hyping her up in like all these different videos. So that takes us to the next chapter, which is the symbolic and the semiotic. Now, Kristeva is really coming out of Lacan, who, again, I said I haven't really checked out, but she really is interested in how speech there's the symbolic function, but then there's this other layer that she calls the semiotic, which is kind of like the layer of language that is like its pure sound and rhythm, and the aspects of it that are not purely symbolic, not functioning as symbolism, but are expressive and evocative and contain meaning, but on this like musical level. The semiotic functions within signifying practices as the result of a transgression of the symbolic. It requires the symbolic break to obtain the complex articulation we associate with it in musical and poetic practices. For me, melisma is really like this unraveling of the symbolic into the semiotic, you know? For Kristeva, she's not even talking about in music. She's talking about in regular speech, how there's the musical aspect of regular speech. The symbolic is constantly being threatened by the semiotic. The sort of the song-like aspect of speech, the rhythms, the cadences, you know, the timbre, like these slight inflections that say just as much as the words say, you know? Now, this thing about the symbolic versus the semiotic, I'm not the only one who has sort of enfolded this into ideas of Jewishness and anti-Semitism. Kristeva, she talks about Louis Ferdinand Céline, and he talks about how Céline was like a notorious anti-Semite Nazi sympathizer. She talks about Céline's whole thing as being a rage against the symbolic. Céline has this real ambivalence toward language, even though language is his medium. He says, to resensitize language, to have it throb more than reason. Such was my aim. That doesn't happen without imparting to thought a certain melodic twist. So to him, even thought should be melodic. Kristeva, when talking about Céline, says, his rage against the symbolic culminates in what Céline hallucinates and knows to be their foundation and forebearer, Jewish monotheism. When one follows his associations of ideas, his anti-Semitism is a sweeping away of abstraction, reason, and adulterated power, considered emasculating. The verbal, normal language is adulterated power. The symbolic is adulterated power. The semiotic, the rhythmic, the melodic twist that he talks about, that's purer power. This kind of just is riffing on what I was doing in Ritual Fire, where play. It's anti-Semitic to do melisma. That's a little ridiculous, right? But it's not, because that's this actually, like, I actually feel this, you know? There's this humor to melisma, just this freedom of like leaving words behind, you know? R. Kelly knew this, you know, when he's singing like something sexual and ridiculous and then just departs into pure melisma. There's a humor to it when you just start, like, you just depart from the rigorousness of speech and you just go into pure play. Kristeva when she's talking about Celine. She says, rhythm and music are the only way out, the ultimate sublimation of the unsignifiable. I love how, these intellectuals and these high-level philosophers, so much of the time they just come around to this vibey sort of worship of music as like, man, philosophy's great, but like it's nothing like a great riff, dude, just vibing with music. Ultimately, these like hardcore intellectuals almost admire just these like more naive just people like the rest of us who are just trying to sing and rock out. It really, when I hear these people say things like that, it makes me feel honored to sort of fortunate and proud to be sort of called to this noble thing called music that goes beyond the symbolic and goes to the semiotic. Although, like the sort of the general point of what I'm talking about is that in my work, the melisma, the use of melisma, it's this unraveling of the symbolic out into this purely semiotic and then back to the symbolic and in and out, So the essay basically ends, last chapter, I'm just talking about, moving forward, the future of what I'm doing and where I'm at right now. I've been saying this a little bit in the simple answers behind the music, that I'm moving more towards music that is less reliant on text. I mean, I'm always going to be writing lyrics because I'm a singer, and no matter how melismatic you make stuff, I mean, text, you kind of have to. Unless you're the Cocteau Twins, where they're doing pure, she was doing pure sound. But I can't do that. I got to have words. But I'm reviving melisma in the stuff I'm writing now that you're going to be hearing in 2022. I've got some surprises for you cats. Stuff you might have some intimations about what's coming, but I won't spoil the surprise. But melisma is back, baby. It's back. With Psalm 0 for a while, I was kind of restricting it back into syllabic text setting. But we're going to be seeing more of an opening up where the text is going to be more of like a springboard for opening up with melisma. In a way, all of this stuff, no matter, even if it's syllabic text setting, even if it's normal singing, on some level, all this is just an excuse to do music. I mean, yeah, I have poetic things to say. Obviously, I have a lot on my mind. These lyrics matter, obviously. But sometimes I just want to get out of my head and just completely open up into the realm of melisma. Something that's kind of ironic that I point out at the end here is that, and I realized just by writing the piece, I realized that at the end, that even though it sort of serves as, it functions in my stuff as this limit of meaning where you go beyond meaning and you go into pure materiality, okay? But the thing is, I'm always using it to represent the idea of the unrepresentable. I'm using that pure materiality to poetically represent the idea of pure materiality. So it's like it has, in certain ways, it always has been feeding back into a sort of narrative, poetic thing of meaning, quote unquote. The meaninglessness of melisma, the beautiful sort of quote unquote pointlessness of the pure materiality, it does end up getting always enfolded back into having a point or telling a story. Whereas, when you're getting into, if you talk about like the Cocteau Twins, like I brought up, I mean, that's like pure vocalization. That really is not, because it's not even contrasted with Elizabeth Fraser. It's not even contrasted with words. It really is just pure sound. Maybe I'll get into that. Maybe I'll just do that. That's bold. That would I'd have to find cool syllables that I'm really feeling, But in any case, I think this is another reason why I'm more into writing now. I'm like getting into essays. Not more into writing than music, obviously, but I'm more into writing than I used to be. Because maybe I'll just get all my, brain spasming, yapping, verbal shit out here in the essays and the YouTube channel. And so then the music can become more like melismatic, pure, hardcore materiality of sound. Maybe that's how it'll kind of go. Maybe my thoughts and ideas will sort of split off from my musical practice a little bit more. So anyway, yeah, pick up the book, Arcana 10, essays from a lot of today's finest minds. And stay tuned for more melisma coming in 2022. More melisma than the past 5 years combined is coming at you. All right?